So this is note-taking part 2. Now in the first video, I went over how to take notes in a very general sense for most calls, most incidents that you'd run into as a police officer, as a security guard. If you have a domestic, you have time to get the story, come back, get the person's information, and then rewrite the story down. And oftentimes when you're doing that, it allows you to get the story from them in 2 different ways. And what I mean by that is the person tells it to you one time, then you get all their information, you distract them for a little while. When you come back, they tell it to you again, and they're going to use slightly different words, and sometimes you can get more clarification as to what happened. Now, what I want to go over today is times when you don't have time to get that information. We're not talking about when somebody gets their mailbox run over, and we're not talking about when somebody can't get along with their old lady, and we're not talking about when 2 cars have a car crash. What I'm talking about here is when there's some type of more critical incident where the information that we're gathering is time sensitive. What this comes down to is less so much taking notes, although that's the area that I'm going to go into, and it's kind of runs into the realm of interview techniques. When you show up on scene of an incident, let's say our incident today is an armed robbery, you're going to have a certain amount of information, otherwise you wouldn't be going there. Central's going to tell you that there was an armed robbery in progress, let's say at the subway, and there's 2 male offenders armed with handguns, and they were inside the store, and then they fled in a red vehicle. Let's say, just for instance. Clearly, dispatch isn't going to get all of the information that you're going to need, and that's why you're going. Because if they could get all the information you would need, you wouldn't even have to go there to do the report. You could just do the thing over the phone most of the time. Our first responsibility when we come on scene on an incident like that is to find out basically what happened, to make sure a crime actually occurred, and that we are looking for people for the right reasons. And second, to get a description and relay that to other units in the area. They're going to be looking for those people. Now, I'd like to talk about both of those for a second. When people call and they say they've been robbed, oftentimes what happened wasn't really a robbery. And it's important because our response to the call is going to depend on what actual crime occurred, what actually occurred on the scene. If somebody says the subway was robbed and what actually happened was somebody ran in and grabbed a big stack of those delicious Subway chocolate chip cookies and ran out the door, and we go putting a description out for him, and that guy takes off in a car and we get into a pursuit because it was a robbery, and then somebody gets killed, that's going to be a problem. Not just a liability problem, not just a policies and procedures problem, but a having to look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day problem. Having to look at yourself in the mirror when you shave the next morning before you go to work problem. It's something you're going to have to live with, that somebody got killed because you made a, what in any other industry would be, clerical mistake. So our first responsibility is to talk to the people and find out what happened in brief. The first person you show up on scene, and oftentimes you have to distract them, you have to hit the reset button on the person and say, what happened? And they're going to say, well, I was doing blah, 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 blah. No. In a nutshell, what happened? You said you were robbed. Did they have guns? What did they take? What happened? How many of them were there? Start from the start. Did they have a gun? Did they have any type of weapon? Did they have a knife? Did they point it at anybody? So let's say in our instance, they start going off, the clerk starts going off with, well, they came in and they had a gun and they pointed at me and they said to give me all the money from the drawer, and so I handed them the money from the drawer, and then they took off and they got in this this red Subaru Outback, and then they headed off northbound on Main Street. Okay, now we have a robbery. Not only do we have a robbery, but where I'm working, we have an armed robbery, which is going to make a big difference in our response. With an armed robbery, it's a forcible felony. It's more likely that we are going to chase that person a lot further than we would for a retail theft. And our use of force in taking the people into custody is going to be a lot different if we know that those people were armed with handguns when they came into the subway and robbed it, than if we thought that maybe it was a strong arm robbery. Maybe they just came in, grabbed her by the shirt, and yelled at her, and she gave them and threatened her, and she gave them the money. That's still a robbery technically, here where I'm talking about, but it's not an armed robbery, and we're not going to be expecting that they have a weapon, because hopefully if they had a weapon, they would have tried to use it in the robbery. That just kind of seems like common sense, although we can't always depend on criminals having common sense. So we've discovered that it is a robbery, and then we can start getting a description. And the important thing is that we get the best description that we can from the person up front, and then we relay it to other units. So when we write it down in our notes, we have to take into account that we're going to have other things that we need to put in our notes, and we need to write down what we're going to need to give out to other units first. So what I do, as per my first video, is I skip a couple of lines, so that way I have space to write the time, the incident number, and the pertinent info of the clerk. So I'll just start off by striking a line. And then I'll start off with, all right, what did you said there was two guys? The first guy, the one that had the gun, what did he look like? All right, he was a male white. He's about 5'11", and he's heavy set. So heavy set, what do you mean? Well, I don't know. Okay, so we write heavy set. In this instance, we're not going to look at a particular weight. We want to get the description out as fast as possible and as accurately as possible. And the best way is to put it out, in some respects, in the way that the victim or the witness gives it to us. So he's a male white, 5'11", heavy set. He had dreadlocks. And he was wearing a blue sweater, dark pants. And then she goes into, he ran out the door, yada, yada, yada. I said, hold up. Did he have any facial hair? No, he didn't have any facial hair. Do you remember what color his shoes were? Were his shoes like a bright color? No. His shoes weren't a bright color. All right, did he have a different color belt? What color were his pants? Start asking questions about things that are going to separate this person from any other person you see on the street. This is a pretty good description. A male white, 5'11", heavy set with dreadlocks and a blue sweater. But you'd be amazed when you start being the person who's going out looking for this. I guarantee you, when the incident comes out and you're looking for the male white who's 5'11", heavy set with a blue sweater with dreadlocks, you're going to end up finding 3 of the dudes walking around. That's just the way it ends up going. So try to get as much information as humanly possible from a person. When you ask a person what somebody looks like, oftentimes they're going to give you their race, they're going to give you about how tall they are if you prod them for it. They're going to tell you whether they were fat or skinny, and they might remember a hair color. But beyond that, you're not going to get any other description unless you go to pull it out of them. So you have to pull that information out of the victim or out of the witness. So you get that, you get as far as you can go with asking her about hair color, eye color, facial hair, shoe color, belt color, what color with the pants, what type of pants were they. There's a big difference between like Adidas running pants and blue jeans or nice slacks that you'd go to a fancy dinner in. You get that, you get as much information about the first guy as you can. I like to mark them offender 1, and you say, all right, what kind of gun was this that you're talking about? You said he had a gun. What kind of gun was it? Was it a black gun? Was it a silver gun? Did you know the difference between a revolver and a semi-auto? Well, I think it was a black gun. It was big and it was black. Well, they're always going to say it was big and black. Dump. But put down what they tell you and then relay that. Let's say it was a black semi-auto. And say, all right, what about the second guy? Well, the second guy was in the car. Well, did you see him? No, but I think he was a black guy. Now, here's where you run into problems. You have to understand that when people give a description, they oftentimes create details that they don't really remember. So keywords you want to look for is when somebody says, I think it was whatever, you have to prod further. You have to ask them, well, did you see the guy's face? Well, no. Okay, you didn't see his face. And he was in the car, right? So did you see, what was it that you saw? Did you see the color of his sweater? Well, no, I just kind of saw a shadow in the car. And the other guy, this guy, the first guy with the gun, he ran to the passenger side of the car and the car sped away. So offender number 2, unknown driver. Because that's what we know for sure. Oftentimes people will fill in details that they're not sure of, and they'll just throw in what they think. If they see a shadow in the car, and the shadow they know is driving through the circumstances, they'll assume that shadow is a black male, for whatever reason. Oftentimes it's because people assume that criminals are male and they see that it's a dark figure in the car, they assume it's a black male. The problem is you put out the description and somebody's going to let the car with the white female drive away because they're looking for a car driven by a black male, and we don't want to get caught into that. So we get offender number 1, as much information as we can, offender number 2, and then we'll go into the car. She said it was a red Subaru Outback. Now you have to start getting creative with your descriptions, because a red Subaru Outback, when you're not looking for it, it's a very unusual car. When you are looking for a red Subaru Outback, you're going to find a bunch of red Subaru Outbacks. So you need to get as much information as possible about it, and one of the ways you can do that is you can ask people about license plates. People don't know a lot about cars, but they know what the license plate on their car looks like, and they know colors. So you can glean some information if you start asking people, well, was this a plate from, let's say we're in Illinois. Is this a plate from Illinois? No, it wasn't an Illinois plate. I know that. It didn't look like an Illinois plate. Well, it wasn't a regular Illinois plate. Well, what color was the plate? Well, it was yellow. So now we might be talking about maybe an Arizona plate. This might be a rental car, right? So we put down yellow plate. Did it have any bumper stickers on it? Nah, it didn't have any bumper stickers on it. Was there any damage on the car? Did it have a cracked windshield? Was there a dent in the fender? Did you see a dent on the back end? Was it missing its front bumper? No. Was it missing any hubcaps? Did it have hubcaps? Did it have shiny wheels? Did it have oversized rims? Did it have the little skinny tires that go all the way around it? Did it have a spoiler on the back? Start asking people questions about things that you know about cars. And then once you have that information about the car, you ask, okay, well, which direction did they go, and where was the last place you saw them? All right, well, they turned north up Main Street, and then they point south. A lot of people don't know their directions. When somebody tells you a car went a certain direction, ask them which way was that going toward, if you're not right there on the scene. If you are right there on the scene, have them point the direction that they went. Okay, so you glean from, they said it was north on Main Street, but then they pointed south. So it's southbound, Main, from scene. When was the last place you saw him? Well, I saw him drive right down about 5 blocks and they hung a right. So they weren't last seen southbound on Main Street from the scene. They were actually seen westbound on 4th from the scene. So we'll draw a single line through this so it doesn't look like later on we were trying to scratch it out. Westbound 4th from scene. So now we've got everything we need to put out to units. We can get out in the air and say Central 43 on, or however your agency says it, 43 on the offenders. Offenders wanted armed robbery. Offender number 1 is a male white 5'11" heavy set with dreadlocks, blue sweater, dark pants, armed with a black semi-auto. Offender number 2 was the unknown driver of the vehicle. The offending vehicle is a red Subaru Outback with yellow plates, last seen westbound on 4th Street from Maine. So everybody's got what they need to go start looking for the car. And even though it took me a while to explain it, it doesn't take long to do when you're on the scene. And then you can go back and get all the other information. Now, when you go back to get any other information, where I normally start off with was, what did they get? If they got something unusual, when we find somebody, let's say we stop this car, and in the back seat of the car is a drawer from a register. That's kind of an odd thing to be in a car. So if they took the whole cash drawer out with them, the little plastic container that holds all the cash with the different dividers and the flip down levers, if we find that in a car, we see it sitting out, then we know, and they took the whole cash drawer, well, that's dead bang right there. We're pretty sure that those are the guys that we're looking for. So get that out to other units when we get the information in case they find a car. And then we can start getting the time and number of the incident. Time, military time. The number for the incident are 15-00001. And then we can get the information from the victim. Let's say her last name was Frank. First name Ann, 422 and 90, and she lives at 123 Fake in Berwyn, Illinois. 66666, and her phone number is 312 588-2300. And then on the back, I would put the address of the business and maybe the owner of the business, any other information that I thought was pertinent. So even though I'm coming on the scene and quickly trying to get information from the victim, as you can see, when I'm done, my notes are very well put together because I planned out what I was going to do in advance. And half the battle with police work is having a plan in advance before you go into a situation. And part of it is having a set plan that you always use, especially for something like this. If you have a system for taking notes, you have a set plan for where on these notes am I going to put the descriptions of the offenders up front, then you don't end up with the big sloppy mess of cards and ripped out pages, and you've got your description up here and then the victim's information down here and then the clerk you had to go back with. Have a system. Use your system, and it's going to make your report writing easier, and it's going to make your job easier. I know that note-taking isn't the big exciting part of police work, but it's an important part. It's an important part of police work. It's an important part of security work. Imagine how much better you're going to look if you're a security guard and you have to hand your notes to a police officer if you hand them this instead of a bunch of scribbles on the back of a card. It's going to make your job a lot easier later on, and it's going to make them take you more seriously. If you're a police officer, when you're writing your report and your supervisor comes up and asks you about an incident, they have some question, and you pull out your notepad and it looks like this, imagine what your supervisor is going to think about you later on when you have some other issue on the street that they have to resolve, if they know that you're doing your job in a professional manner and you have a system set up for dealing with your job instead of looking like a slob that just has a bunch of cards with stuff written on the back.